Greetings from beautiful downtown Indianapolis. Today we're going to take a look at a very interesting set of resources for genealogists. And what you see on the screen here is the clientele, the people that participated in the Civilian Conservation Corps. We're going to focus a little mostly on Indiana, but not necessarily all on Indiana. The time frame that we're going to be talking about is the 1930s. But unfortunately, the 1930s did not exist in a vacuum. Okay, so we really have to set it up a little bit. We have to talk a little bit about things leading up to the 1930s. And that period is usually considered to be the Great Depression. But we need to back up. Let's go back to early 20th century. The 20th century wasn't exactly the best century to live through, especially in the United States and in a lot of places in the world. The first 10 or 12 years were okay, I guess, but along around 1914, a world war broke out in Europe and it spread throughout a lot of the rest of the world. Millions of people died as a result of World War I. Many of them were casualties in various other ways because of the war, and it affected the United States not as much as most European countries, but still, hurt it quite a bit. The other bad part about it, is that there was a Spanish flu epidemic going on at the same time, and the Spanish flu killed more people than World War I did. And since they were going on at the same time, it was a pretty traumatic time to be alive. Basically, though, most people lived through it, and both events sort of petered out around 1919, 1920. And most people were looking forward to having a good 1920s, recovering from all of this previous trauma. But then another little interesting thing happened. The United States Congress passed a law, 18th Amendment to the Constitution, in which they prohibited alcoholic beverages in the United States. Couldn't buy it, drink it, use it, sell it, do anything with it, except maybe disinfect something once in a while. And so the 1920s, which everybody was looking forward to, turned out not to be the paradise that they were anticipating. What it really happened is they turned a lot of people into criminals because they were breaking the law every time they took a drink. And a lot of the alcoholic supplies were provided by the criminal element, the mob. You've heard of some of those people like Al Capone, and John Dillinger and that thing. So the 1920s weren't exactly a good time, but a lot of people tried to make the best of it. You may have heard of the dancers and all of that kind of stuff. One of the things that also happened bad during the 20s is that there was a lot of money floating around because of, alcoholic sales and things like that. And a lot of people started doing things that were not really sound as far as economics were concerned. Everybody assumed that the stock market, which had been going up and up and up, they thought it was going to continue that way. So they said, well, I want in on that. So they would borrow some money and they would buy some stock. Say you borrowed $5,000 and you bought $5,000 worth of stock. And your idea was, well, we're going to just wait a little bit. And then when the stock that we bought doubles in value, we'll sell it and pay our loan back. And then we'll have all of this extra money. And lots and lots of people did that kind of thing. And other people wanted in on the good times too. A lot of them were bankers, and they started lending money to people, and they did not take real seriously the idea of requiring some kind of collateral for that. So the banks had a lot of shaky loans out there, and the companies did the same thing. Various business companies, they borrowed money from the banks, or they did something like that, and they started doing things that weren't economically sound. So here toward the end of the 20s, you had all these risky loans, and then the banks started failing, and people that had their money in the banks lost it because the bank accounts in those days were not secured, not insured by anything. So you had all these nasty things happening. And then in October of 1929, what was just called Black Tuesday, we just had Black Friday. We're going to Black Tuesday this time. Everything, this house of cards just collapsed and it fell apart. And millions of people lost all kinds of money. Lots of people couldn't pay their mortgage or their rent. They got evicted. A lot of people lost their jobs when their companies went out of business. And it was really a serious economic crash. There's no other way to say it. Okay, so that was what the beginning was of the 1930s. Okay, this kept on going until 1932. 1932 was a presidential election year, like we just went through, kind of. And President Herbert Hoover didn't really have a good handle on what to do about all this. And a lot of people didn't. I mean, ideas were few and far between in a lot of places. But one of the things that people did, they held Herbert Hoover responsible for all this, and the Republicans. He was a Republican. So in the 32 election, they booted him and a bunch of his friends out, and they elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt and a bunch of Democrats. And they told Hoover, "It's your responsibility. You're responsible." And then they told Roosevelt, "Well, you got to fix this." And that's what came about as part of what is called the New Deal. What Roosevelt did, he was a very creative individual, and he was looking around for things to keep people from starving to death, keep people from living in cardboard boxes and things like that. So he came up with a program called the New Deal. And what that was, the federal government set up a bunch of companies owned by the federal government, and they hired a bunch of people to do things, some kind of a chore of those companies, and they paid them, a stipend, a little bit, enough money to keep them and their families from, totally being bankrupt and, having all kinds of problems. Okay. Now, the federal government didn't really have that money, but they had a printing press and they could print some money. They could print money. So that's what they did. They printed a bunch of money and they gave it to these employees that they had. And that's what got us into the New Deal, of which the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1933 was part of. Okay. There's other ones that have other jobs, WPA, TVA, all that kind of stuff. You can look that up. And a lot of your people were probably involved in that too. So let's take a look at the records. And as you look at these records that we go through there, think of it as a genealogical opportunity. We are far enough away from it. It doesn't affect them now, but many of these people were very lower economic status, lower educational status. I grew up in West Virginia, in the hills of West Virginia, and there's a lot of people like that. There still are in many of the Appalachian areas. It's a kind of a cliche, something like that, but these people don't make a lot of documents. So if you have somebody like that, I've had a hard time researching my own family name because they are, Scotch Irish in the mountains, and they did not generate very many documents. So it's really a lot harder to research them. Now, the nice thing about the New Deal documents is that most everybody that was hired by the federal government for these programs were in that status. So you're going to find some interesting documents that would not exist if it wasn't for the New Deal records. Let's take a look at the Civilian Conservation Corps, exactly what its job was. There again, it started in 1933 as part of a work relief program, and it extended clear up until the beginning of World War II, when the people were needed for war jobs. It was only for unemployed, unmarried men, mostly white men. We don't say that here, but that's the way it turns out. We'll take a look at that. And they could serve They were expected to serve at least 6 months and a maximum of 2 years doing things. The CCC's job was mostly trees in the beginning. They planted nearly 3 billion trees. And this was a good thing because a lot of people who were unemployed, and out of living in shanty towns, cutting down trees because they had to heat the place and they had to cook the food. So millions of trees were being cut down so that CCC's job was to replace these trees. So in like basically 9 years, they planted nearly 3 billion trees. And they constructed a lot of parks, national parks, state parks, national forests, state forests, historical sites, like Mount Vernon, those kinds of things of historical value and things. They did a lot of that kind of stuff. And they developed new forest fighting methods. Some of the things that they're using today in the United States were originally developed in the 1930s by the CCC, and they're still good. And they also constructed various kinds of buildings. They built dams and bridges, roads, sort of an infrastructure type program. And to do this, I mean, there were like over 2.5 million men, and they were paid about $30 a month in most cases. Now, the nice thing about it is that they only got about $5. The other 25 went home to their parents and their families to help support them. So this thing worked two ways, and it was a very good thing for both the parents and the families. The guys didn't need much money. They lived in barracks for free. They were fed by the government. They had medical care. The barracks that they lived in, they had to build themselves. They lived in tents before that. So, it was a motivational type thing. So this was basically the way that the CCC operated all over the country. The camps were operated by the U.S. Army. The Army didn't have much to do either in it. So they thought, hey, let's let the Army do this. So basically what you see here are the districts. We are in Indiana is in District 5, along with Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. But all of the systems, all of the CCC system worked exactly the same across the country. So if you have somebody in one of these other states, one of these other districts, what we're talking about for Indiana in a little bit, it works exactly the same in the other districts, okay? Now, since the Army was involved, the CCC was a very highly structured thing. And they were structured like an army. They were called companies. And the companies, if you take a look at this diagram here, you didn't have a, president or anything like that. You had a commanding officer, just like all other military things, and stewards and barracks and orderlies and messes and stuff like company clerks. So this same pattern worked all over the United States. This exact same diagram here would be familiar to anybody over there. We're going to take a look at the Indiana program, but like I say, they work the same all over the country. This is a picture of some men at Fort Harrison. You'll notice the snappy dressing. The Army guy there, he's okay, but you'll notice they're not wearing uniforms, but they're sort of catch as catch can. That's pretty much what they look like throughout the 9 years. Like I say, we were in the 5th Army Corps with Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Indiana had about 28 campsites around the state, and they had numerous projects, different projects. I mean, one camp might have built a dam, and then they would build a fire prevention project or something like that. Indiana had, like I say, 57. The headquarters was Fort Benjamin Harrison here in Indianapolis, and approximately 63,700 men were involved in Indiana. When you consider that we're just looking at unmarried young men, very narrow age limit and stuff like that, that was a big percentage of the Hoosiers in that area. The important thing was notice that over $55 million were spent in Indiana and the equivalent amounts in other states. So the object was to support the families of these people and do things infrastructure around the country. So it did exactly what they intended it, and a lot of people owe their survival to the CCC and other projects just like that. There's a good website that I would recommend that you take a look at. This is not a government website. It started out as people who graduated from the CCC. It's called the CCC Legacy. If you Google that, or there's the URL down below there. There's a whole bunch of stuff about the CCC all over the country, and they can familiarize you with, if you have somebody who turn up somebody in the CCC, you can see a little bit about what they went through and how everything worked out. In that website, there's a list of all of the camps around the country, and they're listed by state over here on the left-hand side, you'll notice. And what you see on the screen is part of the camps in Indiana. They're all over the place. The projects had numbers, and the companies had numbers. And some companies had more than one project, so that's why the numbers are different like that. They have the date that they started. You'll notice that it has a railroad station. In those days, not many people traveled by car or plane or anything. Most everybody had to go to a railroad depot and catch a train to where they wanted to go. Or they also mail post things to post offices. So that will locate them for you, and the location of the name and everything like that over there. But you can go to any of these states here, open up that, and this is what you will get. It will be able to tell you where the camps were in that state and the projects involved and all that kind of stuff. But this is in the Legacy website. I did go down to the state archives. I thought, well, maybe in Indiana, they might have something. But actually, the problem is this is a federal program, and the state and archives state was not really too involved that way. I did find, though, was this collection two there. There was this little shoebox looking collection of worker cards from Clay County, and they had index cards for the CCC people from Clay County. Nobody at the archives knows why this is in there. They don't know where it came from. They don't know who sent it or anything like that. If it's up to me, I'd send it back to where all the rest of them are. But anyway, I pulled this out and I looked at it, and I pulled out some of these index cards, and what they were these Form 2s that you see here. So I just pulled one out at random and looked at it, and I thought, okay, I can use this. Now take a look up at the top. Everett Jenkins was the enrollee, gave his date of birth. So, he's in the time frame. Over on the right-hand side is his mom, and you'll notice that they live together. Okay. Now the camp location, you need to pay attention to that. Camp location, Woods Cross, Utah. Now here's a guy from Brazil, Indiana, and they shipped him all the way out to Utah to do civilian conservation corps job. Okay, you would think they would stay around home. The problem is they had more people in some places than they needed and not enough in others. So they just, since they were paying them, they just shipped them all over the country, wherever they needed some people. So don't expect, if your guy is from Ohio or Kentucky, don't expect, if they're not there, they're not anywhere. You need to branch out and look at the entire country, because you never know where they're going to turn up. There again, it's some details about, notice there's a lot of resources just on this one little card here. Now look at down to bottom there. It tells when he got out, May 8th, 1940. And notice over under, it said transferred to the U.S. Maritime Service. There's another clue just on this card here that you probably don't know about. You don't know if he worked for the Maritime Service. So there's a clue that you can branch out. So what I did, I took this card that I had, and I went to the National Archives branch in St. Louis, and I found where you could search for Civilian Conservation Corps enrollees at the National Archives in St. Louis. You'll notice that it is called the National Personnel Record Center. A lot of us genealogists are used to going out here, sending documents to them, asking for information. but it's mostly for military people, right? But it's actually anybody who actually worked for the federal government, like the post office, for instance. There's millions of post office records. These are employment records, personnel records, they're employment records. So anybody in your family that ever worked for the federal government, there should be a personnel record sitting in St. Louis. Now, you've heard this story about the big fire they had down there in 1973, in which all of these military records burned up. So, what were those records from? Well, World War I and World War II. Now, where are the Civilian Conservation Corps enrollee records? Right in between, in the 1930s, right in between those two military groups. So if your guy's military records burned up, chances are that he also participated in the CCC or one of the other New Deal, which, right in between there. So you might, if you haven't, send for some of these New Deal records and hope that they can fill in the gaps that you lost when the military records burned up. So it's pretty, if you ever used them before, it's pretty much standard. They ask you for stuff that, well, they always ask you for stuff that you are writing to them to get. So that it's kind of, sometimes it's not as easy as it looks, but you have to give them whatever you have. I used the card that I found for Everett and sent that as a request, and they sent me, what they had on them. Now, the first thing that a candidate had to do for him to have records in the archives, he had to apply for the program. Now, this is the application that Everett, they sent me his file, and this is the application that he filled out to apply for the CCC. There's lots of good information on here. It verifies, notice, the birth information, place, date of birth, and all that kind of stuff. Many of these guys in that time frame did not have birth certificates. My dad's family, he's from one of 8 people. Only the 2 youngest ones had birth certificates. The other ones were delivered by a midwife out in the hills, and they never went down and recorded them. So they had to go sideways. It's nice to have a government document like this if you don't have a birth certificate, for instance, showing that, yes, what that is true. There's other stuff. He was a graduate of Brazil High School in 1939. Not many of these guys did. A lot of guys had to drop out of school. They had to go to work somehow and finding something to help support their family. Okay, so the fact that he graduated from high school was kind of unusual. And down below here again is his mother's name and everything, verifying all that kind of stuff. So he would have sent this in, and they would have evaluated it and said, okay, he meets the parameters. We have a place for him. And they would have him report to a station, a National Guard Armory, lots of times. This one's in Newcastle, Fayette County. And what you see here is the group that gathered around. This is not his. I found a better one. And you can see it tells where they were from, their names, and various things that happened to them. I flipped in the middle there, everything's up and down. I flipped it over on the right-hand side for you can read it easier. It tells you various things that happened to him while they were at the selectee station. Okay, now you'll notice a couple things. One, that the enrollees were segregated. There were no mixed companies. They were all either white or colored. You're down at the bottom on the left-hand side, you'll notice Robert Huey and James Ware. These were the 2 black guys on this particular group. And they had a C, which means he was the colored candidate. Then they had a CA, that was the colored alternate. So they were only accepting one. And this whole group here, so if something happened to Robert Huey, only then did James Ware become a CCC person. And then from here, they would have been picked out to go somewhere. They would have been put on a train, probably more than one, and then shipped out to that particular camp in Indiana or some other state, some other place. Okay, so these kinds of things will probably not be in his personnel file, but you might be able to find them in some other collection with his name on it to tell you that kind of thing. Now, what you got from the archives is the permanent record form, Form 1. And Form 1 had 7 pages divided into 14 sections. And the 14 sections are listed over there. Some of the things they did, they would have had filled out, some things not. But over here on the right-hand side, this is Form 1, page 1, Section 1. It's general information, basically the same things that we had on the other card. If you'll notice his height and weight and stuff, 5'11", 140. He was a pretty tall, skinny guy, maybe not well fed. And it gives some other details there that you may not know. Okay, gray eyes. How many people have gray eyes? I don't know. And his job was a laborer and stuff like that. And down at the bottom is Section 2. He had to do a vow. You always have to do a vow. Some of the other things, Section 6 here tells you the specific kind of work that he did and where he did it. Now, this one, he was a canteen steward in Woods Cross, Utah. Okay, so that bears that out. And the time, the dates in between. And down at the bottom is the second one, he changed jobs. So he became a pick and shovel guy. I don't know why. And then he was transferred to Fort Benjamin Harrison. Could be he requested it. Could be that they wanted to ship him back to his home state, anything like that. It doesn't say why. A lot of details here that you probably have not had on any other document about this guy. They did have a cumulative record. Some things were different a little bit, but most of it is just a rehash of what that tells him where he was stationed, what jobs he did. It was basically a collection of some of the other documents up there. Each of the companies had a medical facility, usually a doctor of some kind, basically maybe stationed in the nearest town or something like that, and he'd come out every once in a while. I don't know that they all had full-time doctors. This happened. He was in the hospital at Fort Douglas, Utah. And a nice thing about it, see the red arrow there, this one gives the name of his father, which has not appeared on anything else. So now you have both his mother and his father on this particular thing. Down below is what happened and why and how they handled it and stuff like that. So this was in his medical, in his personnel file. It wasn't the same series of forms as the other ones, but it was in there because some people wouldn't have one of these if they hadn't been hurt. Another thing that the CCC did was they educated the people. A lot of guys, like I say, had dropped out of school. A lot of them didn't really attend school at all, hardly. So they took it on themselves to do some other stuff. They looked at this guy here, some of his jobs, what he did, okay, and he did these skill things. So he had these skills from the CCC. There again, he may not have been really highly educated. So what they did, they made each one of them attend school. And you'll notice here, training courses completed in camp. History, elementary English, civic, shorthand, and I like this one, log cabin construction. Someplace in one of the camps of one of the forests or something like that, he had to build a log cabin. But notice they were 48 weeks long, so they were fairly good size. So they were much better educated when they were done with the CCC. Let's take a look at some other stuff. One of the interesting things, each of the camps had a camp newspaper. There's a weekly, in most cases. This one that you see here is from Lafayette, Indiana, a company up there, 1587. There were like maybe 4 pages, sometimes 6, that kind of thing. Mimeograph, if you ever know what a mimeograph was. Some of the guys were, educated. Some of the guys were good writers, paper shufflers and stuff. So they often got the job of producing the camp newspaper. Now, these newspapers are really good because they're full of anecdotes and information about the guys in camp. So they can tell you some interesting things about your guy that you might not ever know or ever be able to find out any other way. These are for Indiana. We're talking about Indiana now. A lot of these are in the Indiana State Library, and they've just finished digitizing the ones that they have, and they're on their website. So if you're looking for a certain camp, a certain location, go on the state library and look it up. Or if you're in an area, go down there and you can even get a copy of it. But you can get it printed out if your guy is mentioned and stuff like that. Like I said before, though, the camps were racially segregated. So if you are doing African American research, you have to look at one of the segregated camps. They are listed as that. Okay, this was at Fort Ben Harrison here in Indianapolis, and you can go out to Fort Harrison, and they have a big concrete squares about the size of a car, garage, and there's about 50 of them in a big square, and that's where the camp was. You can see the camp today, still there. There's another source for newspapers. It's called the Center for Research Libraries. It's just for other states. Okay, the ones that we just looked at are strictly from Indiana, but other states had the similar things. This one, what you're seeing here, is a camp in West Virginia, stuff like that. But this CRL covers the whole country, so there's lots and lots of CCC newspapers that your folks might be mentioned in. There's other things in the state library to deal with the CCC. Not all of them about Indiana. Notice the second one here is Coronado National Forest. That's California. But anyway, there's lots of other stuff. I researched on CCC and I come up with 269 items, which is pretty good. They have a lot of digital. They've been busy digitizing stuff like most other libraries and things like that. And I come up with 60 items on that one. So you could check these out. Go on the state library website and look them up. There's some printed stuff, miscellaneous. It's hard to say exactly what you're going to find because it's relatively miscellaneous after you get out of the archive area. On the left-hand side there is a book that the Crawford County Historical Society created about the CCC in their county and in the Perry County. So these would be in your local library. You might be able to find them on catalogs and all over the place. On the right-hand side is a book that was produced by the CCC in 1939. It lists take pictures of all the guys and it gives all their names and the camps and all that kind of stuff. That's if your guy was in the CCC that late, that's pretty much toward the end. He might be in that particular book. You can get it from borrowing it from somebody. Of course, right here at Allen County, do the same thing. I did CCC here and come up with 109 hits and stuff. So, every major library is going to have a number of them. Something that just came up earlier this year is a series of aerial photographs that was taken by the Army Air Corps of all of the CCC camps in Indiana. I had never seen this before, and all of a sudden it appeared. What they did is they flew over the camps and they took pictures of the area that the camp. You can see some of the camps are out in the fields and some are in the woods and things like that. But if your guy was in one of these camps during his sojourn in the Corps, I mean, that'll give you a good idea, a good illustration for your genealogy to say, yeah, Grandpa was right here. Brand new, great collection. There are some other websites. We'll just go through them gradually. You'll notice this picture here. This is in Pokagon State Park here in Indiana. That is a shelter that was built by the CCC in the 1930s. Still being used. Notice how well built it is. Look at the logs, the size of those logs. You could build about 20 houses out of just those logs today. And those big chimneys there made out of rocks and things like that. Could be your grandpa was involved in building a log cabin construction. That's probably what they had in mind. But they're all over the state or all over the nation. They're still in use, many of them. were built so good and they were maintained so well in parks and forests and things that they're still very good. There's a there's a museum, CCC museum, called by James Justin. The URL is up at front there. There's lots of things, rosters, photos, documents, various biographies and things like that. You can find that. This is on the handout, by the way. There are random books of various kinds. I found this one here. I was in an airport terminal in Portland, Oregon, waiting on an airplane, and I found this in the bookstore. And I thought, hey, I'll take that back and show everybody. Well, trouble is, not much about Indiana. It's mostly on the West Coast, but it's still, it shows you a lot of stuff about what it was all about and what these people did and how they looked and things like that. So look for these kind of things in on Amazon or eBay or all kinds of places. Things are still coming out. Last winter, about this time, the Indiana Historical Society, in their connections, did this nice long, I think it's about 20 pages long, Civilian Conservation Corps in Indiana. And they featured this Black group. They don't identify a lot of these guys, but hey, maybe somebody would recognize that's Grandpa Joe. But anyways, it's a good article. You ought to, if you have Indiana people, you ought to get this connection from the Historical Society and read it. See it. There's lots of evidence of the CCC around Indiana. This one here is at McCormick's Creek. Tells about the history of that camp and some of the people there and all that type of stuff, and give you some ideas for familiar research and all kinds of stuff. This building right here in McCormick's Creek was built by the CCC, still in use today. They did it good. I was down in Rising Sun a while back, and the museum in there has this nice display about the camp that was there in Rising Sun. Gives a list of the people in the picture, things like that. So you can find this information all over the place. Probably let's end up a little bit with some miscellaneous stuff here. Item 1, there was actually a small program for unemployed women. Most women didn't work anyway in those days. So, this was something that Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a very strong feminist, pushed, and they were called the she camps. Thought that it wasn't that cute. Anyway, you might, if you have a female in your family that you think might be involved in that kind of thing, you might look for that somehow. And the veteran conservation course, there were lots of World War I veterans who were unemployed, and homeless and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people started griping about it because we are treating our veterans very badly. So they came up with a veteran conservation course. So several of the camps were specifically designed for veterans only. And they did the same kind of work that everybody else did, except their clientele was a little bit different. And they were paid a little bit more money depending on what their family, what their situation was. And so you might look for that. If you had somebody in World War I and you think that this might be a thing that they did during the 30s. There was a Native American division. Most people don't realize that. And there were several camps that were 100% Native American. They didn't separate them by tribes, but they just could belong to any recognized tribe. They never had a permanent camp. What they did, for some reason, they put them on buses or trains and they transported them to some place to do a project. And then when they were done, they housed them there and then they moved them somewhere else. So, but they didn't have the same kind of camps that the other people did. The reason that the CCC stopped and the New Deal stopped was because World War II ramped up and all the people had more jobs than they knew what to do with. So they didn't need to be provided with one. So many of the camps, were converted to other things. A lot of them, they had a problem during a war for conscientious objectors. Nobody liked the idea that this guy could skate out because of his religious or pacifist or something beliefs. So they did something. They put the conscientious objectors in these camps the ones that were empty, and they made them do the same kind of work that they needed for anybody else. So just because you didn't have to go to the Army or Navy, but you did have to work for the company. So these, you can find records on these too. They did have, some of the camps held prisoners of war. Japanese, not much, because the Japanese were put on the West Coast, were put in special camps that were built just for them. Mostly they had to build them. So this was something that followed up of the camp, the system, and the whole project. Okay, plus the Army was needed someplace else, so they had to stop. So what you'll find when you research the Civilian Conservation Corps, there's lots of great documentation. The personnel file that we looked at here was typical, and sometimes they were bigger than that. Okay, and lots of information is in there that they did not generate anywhere else, not even in the military or anything like that. So it was a critical problem, and it helped millions of Americans, probably some of yours. I know some of mine, lots of Hoosiers. I think if you check it out, if you have somebody in this age group in the 1930s, run their names through the system, see what you can find. You might be pleasantly surprised, and you'll be able to get some information that you would not find anywhere else. Okay, thank you very much. We are now, I guess, open for questions.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. We do have questions. I've also been really enjoying the chat. People have been talking about their own experiences, their family's experiences, etc. So thank you, Ron, for facilitating this great conversation that people have been having. It's really kind of fun to see that happen. But let's start with the first one. Okay. My uncle was in the CCC, but when he registered for selective service in 1940, his employer was shown as the NYA project. Are they related?
I don't know what that is, NYA. It may not be a part of the New Deal. There were some of the states copied projects and things like that a little bit, but I don't know what the NYA would have been.
It looks like,
National Youth something maybe,
yeah, National
like
Youth
this, like this.
Administration.
It could be something to do with children. Uh,
Oh, it was for Americans between the ages of 16 and 25. So, yay for Google. All right. I know my grandma was a seamstress participating in the WPA in Blacklick, Pennsylvania. Would looking for her records be similar to seeking info about a CCC worker?
yes, yes. That was part of the New Deal. All of these were basically federal government businesses hiring people, and their personnel records are in St. Louis. So, whatever job they had, they were getting paid to do by the feds. Okay. And all of those forms and things they had to fill out and do all that same kind of thing. So yeah, send it, go to the website in St. Louis, look it up, WPA, all the New Deal ones have sections, pages for how to do it. Shouldn't be hard.
Perfect, thank you. And the next question kind of follows along with that. So looking for that CCC documentation. So you'd recommend going to the archive in St. Louis, right?
Yeah, yeah. You would have to have some kind of, okay, you would have to know where he lived, maybe, uh, what county, what's you know city, maybe, where birth date, name, parents, things like that. Uh, there's a form you fill out, okay, and you're supposed to fill out as much of it as you can. So the more you fill out, the easier it is for them to find it among billions of personnel records. Uh, and so yeah, you just have to give them as much to work with as you possibly can.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So someone says that they have a Social Security card for my great-grandfather. There's a number on the application that shows U.S. Employment Service registration number pre-1937. Did the CCC give out numbers?
Don't know. I never saw one on the form. Maybe not. Most of, the Social Security didn't start until the early 30s too. Also, uh, and most of the people that applied for it were wanting to get a pension right away. So most of them were older. They were qualified for Social Security. Uh, Most of the other people who were just workers and they weren't going to get Social Security for a long time. And a lot of it was not mandatory like it is today. So I would say that uh, maybe it wasn't part of that CCC or the New Deal or anything like that.
Thank you. All right, the next question is, my guy was in the Army located at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. There was also a CCC camp there. Would my guy be listed in any of the CCC paperwork? Was there any crossover between CCC and regular Army?
The only crossover would have been the CCC was run by Army personnel. Okay, so a lot of the Army personnel, their their connection, things that they had to do Army wise, would have probably been to the closest Army base. But then their daily uh, duty station would have been the CCC camp and the project and whatever they were doing over there. So generally, the Army guys stayed with the camps unless they had to do something military wise that only the regular Army station could handle.
Okay, that's the last of the questions that I see, but I did want to tell everyone that the chat can be requested by sending an email to us, and that email is genealogy@acpl.info. So send us an email and we can send you a copy of the chat. You can also send us any follow-up questions you may have. But thank you, Ron, for a wonderful presentation. People are very pleased in the chat, so thank you. And
Can I insert something here?
of course, please do.
Okay, if anybody out there has paperwork from an Indiana resident who was in the CCC or the WPA or anything like that, uh, the Indiana Genealogical Society could probably use that to add it some to our databases. So you might send it to one of the officers, or you send it to me if you want. Uh, you can just, we don't need originals. You can just photocopy it or scan it or something like that, or email it to us. But the more the merrier. Like I say, some of the people out there, these forms contain information that they probably don't have. So you can help them out if we can get it on our website or in our publications or something like that. Okay, sorry. The end of the commercial.
Thank you so much, Ron. That was great. And yeah, honestly, guys, the more you can put stuff out there, the better. So, all right. Well, thank you so much again, Ron. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you at our next program and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.